Okay, so hello to you all. And this week we're going to be looking at the story of Elisheva, who is, wait a minute, who is Aaron's wife. Share, 1 second, share. Okay, here we go. And I must tell you that when I was looking for art for Elisheva, I wasn't able to find anything. So I came across this wonderful collection of women that's the photographer and artist Dikla Laor has put together. And so you might want to look up for her book on the internet. She has all sorts of women of the Bible, and I have used her pictures before. So this is her image of Elisheva, and we'll start with Elisheva in 1 minute. So this, first of all, the backstory, which I imagine you remember, is that Aaron's sons each took his fire pan, put fire in it, laid incense in it, and they offered before the god alien fire, which he had not told them to do. And fire came forth from God and consumed them. And then they died at the instance of God. And then Moses says these strange words to Aaron. This is what the Lord meant when he said, through those near to me, I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people. And Aaron was silent. All right. So the question is, why was he silent? What does his silent mean? And why did this happen? And there is a general consensus among the rabbis in the Midrash that the victims were responsible for what happened to them. I don't really agree with that particular statement, but it's a terrible tragedy. And maybe one day, you know, I'll teach that chapter by itself. I think I wrote about it a little bit last week or 2 weeks ago. I don't remember, in my blog. But the Midrash give a couple of reasons, and it's based a little bit on evidence in the text and not just, you know, making things up. One of the reasons is they were inebriated, they had drunk wine. Another is that they weren't dressed properly, right? Another is that they didn't wash their hands and feet. And the other is that they thought they were too good to have wives. No one was good enough for them. So they had no wives and consequently no children. And there are other reasons in the Midrash besides what I have listed here, including the fact that they actually they were talking about Moses and Aaron very negatively. Oh, those two old men, you know, they don't deserve to be our leaders. We should do something about it. And the Midrash goes on and on about how they deserve what they got. All right. Anyway, if you were the parents of those children, obviously you wouldn't feel that way. And here's a very interesting painting, which includes Nadav and Avihu. It's called, it's the 15th century, it's a Nuremberg Chronicle. And you can see here that here you have Itamar and Elazar, right? Here you have Aaron, right? Aaron, who is the high priest. Right? By the way, notice how he's dressed a little bit like we would imagine the Pope, who they're now trying to decide who should be the next Pope. He's dressed in pontifical clothing. If you notice here, it says here, pontif in the Latin, make it a little bit bigger, it said pontificum. So, all right, so that's really, he's dressed like the Pope, of course, the high priest. And here you have the fire being sprinkled on Nadav and Avihu, right? And so this is really interesting. And here you have more modern renditions of, this is on a Bible card in the 1907, all right, with their sin. And we just see them preparing, right? And it says the sin, right? They're getting prepared. And here's their foreign fire. And here's another picture like that. Notice they look evil in this picture, right? They're getting ready to do something, and they look very, very sinister here. Here you see James Tissot's understanding of what happened to them. And it's very interesting here. They look like young kids here and very innocent, and they're sort of blown away by what happens to them, as opposed to being burnt as a. And here you have the bodies of Nadav and Abihu being carried away by their cousins, Mishael and Elsaphan, also Tiso. And by the way, his rendition of them is to explain the fact that if they were burned up, how come they were able to drag them away, which in the Bible, it does say they're dragged away. So, right. So, but of course, the question is, in the text, Aaron is silent, but the question is, what about their mother, right? And so we hear absolutely nothing about Elisheva's response. If you think about when Isaac is almost sacrificed, we don't hear anything about Sarah's response, but in Chayei Sarah, which I just happened to teach this morning to my Hebrew-speaking group, you do have in Chayei Sarah that at the opening she dies. And so that gave the Midrash a lot of opportunity to say what? Maybe she died of a broken heart, right? Because she thought Isaac had been sacrificed. But there's that you could at least get some hints that there's a cause and effect to her death after the unsuccessful sacrifice of Isaac. But here, she's not there at all right? There's nothing, all right? However, there is a little mention in the traditional Midrash for the passage that begins for this week's parasha, which is Acharei Mot. Acharei Mot means after the death of the two sons of Aaron, okay? And so this is the Midrash. Now, I have to give you a little bit of a I have to give you a drop of a background to this Midrash. When did I first hear this Midrash? Many, many years ago. It was already in the 1980s. I actually, late 1980s probably, I actually had stopped writing Midrash. Most of my Midrashim had been written really in a very short time period in 1985. And I more or less had stopped writing Midrash. But I had already, had a corpus of Midrashim that I had written. And my husband, Michael, of blessed memory, brought in this Midrash for that parasha. And he thought it was a wonderful Midrash for women. And he thought it was not only did he think it was a wonderful Midrash, he was so proud of himself. I remember this to this day, I'll never forget it, that he said, look, the Midrash is expressing their feelings about Elisheva. Okay. Now, I was very upset about this Midrash. So I'm going to ask you afterwards, why would I be upset about this Midrash, right? So this is how the Midrash goes. Elisheva, the daughter, Bat Aminadav, did not enjoy happiness in the world. True, she witnessed 5 crowns attained by her relatives in one day. Her brother-in-law, they don't give the names, but I put them in. Her brother-in-law, Moses, was a king. Her brother, Nachshon, was a prince, and he's the one who, according to the Midrash, also jumped into the Red Sea, and then the people followed him. Again, that's the Midrash. Her husband, Aaron, was high priest. Her 2 sons, Nadav and Abihu, they were the oldest, were both deputy high priests, which I always thought was very interesting because which one is older, Nadav or Abihu? Were they twins? How come usually it's the oldest one who would be the high priest, the second in command, but both of them had the same status. Pinchas, her grandson, was a priest anointed for war. But so in other words, she has a lot to be proud of. But when her sons entered to offer incense and were burnt, her joy was changed to mourning. Thus it is after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron. What do you think? Okay, let me just stop for a minute. What do you think might have angered me about this Midrash? Susan, yeah.
that they're attributing that her happiness can only be achieved through other people, particularly the men in her life. That might have angered me too.
Okay, good for you. Exactly. All right. So, in other words, her status is attributed to others. It's not intrinsic to her. Okay. In other words, it has nothing to do with her own achievements. It just has to do with who she's connected to, who she's related to. Okay, great. Okay, let's go back to and that's exactly what happened. And what do you think I did? Saturday night, I went home after, of course, people used to love when I would argue with my husband in the synagogue back and forth, because it wasn't, it was arguments, l'shem shamayim, for over the Torah. And they used to love seeing us do that. And of course, I continued at home. And he said, okay, if you don't like it, you write your own story, which I did. Saturday night, I sat down and it came pouring out of me, not that quickly, but it certainly did. And I've shared my own Midrash with you on many occasions. I'm not going to do that today. So let's go back to sharing. Okay, so right away, I analyzed this amazing Midrash. First of all, who is Elisheva? Okay, we don't know anything about her except who she's related to. What is the Midrash saying? We've already said that. What's the connection between her happiness and then her great sorrow? In other words, she only derives happiness from the people she's connected to, and then she loses her the two sons, then she has nothing left, right? Is the Midrash hinting that she was a little bit too happy and maybe schwitzing about her family? The Yiddish word schwitzing means, to brag a little bit too much. Is that a form of hubris? In other words, does she deserve to be knocked down from her high status? Or is it the ayin harak? When you say kedai nahara, is she bringing the evil eye on her family by being too smug about her yichus? Yichus is her connection to others. Did she rise too high and have to be brought down? And then thinking about it, was she like the Kennedy family? Of course, today when we all think about the latest Kennedy, that's, it was a real horror. I mean, I guess this is not a great illusion anymore, but how the mighty have fallen. But okay, so the question is, okay, we have a very sympathetic description of Elisheva in this Moroccan poet who wrote piyutim. Piyutim are like poets, liturgical poetry, and he lived in the 18th century in Morocco. His name was David ben Hassin, and he clearly used that midrash, but look how he wrote. Norman, would you like to read it?
Elisheva, daughter of Aminadav, is an honorable woman. Her husband she saw in the service of the Lord as a priest. Nachshon, her brother, was chief of the tribe of Judah, and the priestly caste came from her loins. Moshe ruled, and her son's son was anointed high priest. She cried to her close women friends. She could have argued, "Woe is me, O God, how my luck has changed. All the people are rejoicing, and I am alone. How could you do this to me? Who is this who had done this?" But she, as a woman of valor, Eshet Chayil, who speaks with wisdom, who is bitter like Hannah, yet keeps her bitter words to herself, and does not complain to the heavens above. She did not challenge God, but accepted his judgment joyously, and recognized that God does what is right and good in his eyes.
Okay,
And-
so this is
okay.
interesting, right? And notice he's clearly, riffing on the original midrash. All right, remember it starts out with she did not enjoy happiness in the world, right? And he's changing it, right? His ending is she accepted his judgment joyously, right? However, there's something wrong here, right? What's wrong here? Well, yes and no, by the way. I
He
shouldn't say that.
contradicts himself.
Okay. In what way?
Well, he says, who is bitter, yet keeps her bitter words to herself. And then he says, but accepted his judgment joyously. Well, you can't be bitter and joyous at the same time.
Okay.
Because if you're bitter, you're definitely not going to be joyous.
Okay. On the other hand, if you remember, after, and this is a very long chapter that you read on Rosh Hashanah, which is Hannah's whole story. And then afterwards, there's also Hannah's song, which makes the Haftarah very long for Rosh Hashanah. But after Hannah's story, where she's bitter and she mumbles herself and everything, and ends up having, in her case, a happy ending, she also has a song. So, in other words, he feels perhaps that you could, unlike Hannah, who did challenge God to a certain degree, she doesn't. And so anyway, he's playing around here, but I agree with you. I agree with you, Stevie, that there is some sort of plus the fact that, is it normal for someone to accept tragedy with joy? I can understand resignation, even justification, right? And here I know I'm treading on very dangerous grounds, but when you lose somebody, who, like in a war, or, and you want to assign some sort of meaning, to somebody's death, you say, it was for a cause, or he was fighting for the country, or something like that. But again, the word joyously definitely, jars us, and it's a little, all right. I'll giving you another before we go on. We'll just leave Elisheva for a minute, but here, as long as we're talking about how do you accept the death of a child, those of you may remember many years ago, Sherry Mandel's son was out walking in the Judean hills and was killed. I think he was 13 years old at the time. And this is many years ago. And then she wrote this book, which was called The Blessing of a Broken Heart. This is what she wrote. Stevie, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to read that?
Sure. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Just read Mourning My Son, okay?
Mourning my son has similarities to labor. The contractions of pain rush through my body like a knot that is tied tighter and tighter so that I am unable to breathe, dead along with my son. My womb becomes a grave. I feel the pain of him in my belly, a pressure bearing down on me. It will always be inside me. And though I hope and pray that one day I will not be as great with pain as I am now, the pain will never leave me.
Okay, and this I found in the Women's Bible commentary, the Torah, on Shmini, which talks about the death of Nadav and Abihu. Okay, and then one more poem, and here we have a modern day. I think I translated this into Hebrew. I never shared it with her because I wasn't able to. I wasn't able to get a hold of her. Avital Engelberg, who wrote for Koleach, which is, I don't know if you're aware of the American organization Jaffa, which is the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Association. And so Koleach is like the equivalent of Jaffa in Israel. Koleach is your voice in the feminine, your woman's voice, all right? And this is what she wrote. Debbie, would you like to read this?
She doesn't speak, but she is present, and her presence is felt already from the beginning. a sort of figure on the stage, watching what's happening from the sidelines. Without a text, she watches, a viewer who is present. Her hand is not even extended to Aaron, and his gaze is not directed at her, but she is present. Maybe she's Kimchi, whose 7 sons died and were high priests. Maybe she was one of the midwives, or maybe she was only Aaron's wife, who brings the priesthood to the monarchy. Who stands beside herself quietly, and Elisheva was silent, but she is present, to her sons, to her husband, and only God knew her pain and her response. The invisible woman, the inaudible, but present. Her great pain is told to us, but what happens next? How is she coping? She is in the Midrash until the awful moment, and there the Midrashim are also silenced. Where is she?
Okay, so this is an amazing, right? This is an amazing poem. And you could see here too that she's accusing the Midrashim of being silent, all right? Even though I'm sure she knows the Midrash that, I brought up. By the way, that Midrash appears more than once. It's not the only place where it appears. And she knows a lot of the Midrashim, one of which is that the midwives, Shifra and Puah, were either Miriam and Yocheved, or sometimes Miriam and Elisheva, sometimes Elisheva and Yocheved. In other words, there are all sorts of, in the Midrash, all sorts of ways of saying that the Hebrew midwives were not Egyptians, right? Egyptian midwives to the Hebrew women, but actually Hebrew midwives. And if they're Hebrew midwives, then you have to give them names of people who are already known. So then that's another theory. And the fact that Elisheva was silent, right? Whereas in the text it says clearly that it was Aaron who was silent. So she puts Elisheva into her husband's body, so to speak, right? Even though they're not, right? Her hand is not even extended to Aaron. So in other words, she and his gate, in other words, they're not together, right? But she's present. And this is actually beautiful because if you think about it, she is, this is actually, I could have used this. All right, it didn't occur to me. I just wrote something cute. I could actually stop sharing. I'll do it later. Someone remind me later to share it with you, where the idea of watching what's happening from the sidelines, all right? Okay, so now we come to the Midrash that I'm going to use, which is Sisters at Sinai. And she wrote something called, Jill Hammer wrote something called The 10th Plague. She has a whole introduction to her Midrash, and we're doing okay for time. She, in her introduction, she talks about who were the midwives. All right, so I already mentioned who the midwives were according to the Talmud, were they Egyptians or Hebrews, and I already discussed this with you, that they were either mother and daughter, or they were daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. I mentioned this earlier, all right? And then the Midrash goes on. This is, again, a riff on the passage. It came to pass because the midwives feared God that he made them houses, all right? And so the houses now become the priestly houses and the Levitical houses in the Midrash, all right? And another one argues, Rav and Shmuel argue, that one says it's the royal houses, and the other one says it's the priestly and Levitical houses. Okay, so notice, who are these houses? Now, who were the houses made for? They were made for the midwives, right? But if you're going to say they're the priestly and Levitical houses, then you have to assign them different women. All right, it's a problem when you start playing around with who the houses belong to. All right, and anyway, Jill, in her preface to or her notes to the midwives story, mentions that she wrote about what she called the 10th plague during the AIDS plague. All right, so that shows you this really dates this particular midrash. All right, and she says the plague was very much on her mind. We could more recently associate the plague with the corona, right, with COVID. I imagine people in the 1920s would associate the plague with the influenza flu, or people in the Middle Ages with the what was that plague called?
The bubonic plague.
Bubonic plague, thank you. Okay. So in other words, every generation has a plague, all right? And so she says the sight of many Egyptians dying must have created panic among the people, right? And so she could imagine first children being pushed out of their homes, shunned, even sacrificed, right? And so this image brought home to her the arbitrary nature of the plague, its unfairness, all right? So she wanted to write about a character who would see this injustice and do something to change it. And that became her character of Elisheva, all right? And so she was also interested in the character of Elisheva. Who was she? Why did Aaron marry her? She relates to the famous Midrash that we just looked about the 5 joys. She wondered, didn't she have any joys of her own, right? And the whole idea of being identified as a midwife. The question was, who delivered the firstborn of Egypt on the night of the 10th plague? Somebody must have been out there. And it was just like during this last plague, where you had doctors, right, working day and night. People continued to work, even though there were plagues, all right? So the whole idea, and how did the plague stop? Was somebody responsible for this, for the plague, all right? So she has her imagination around this. And she also thought of midwifery as a profession and something, that she took very seriously. And then the final connection, which we'll see at the end of the story, what I'm doing is I'm giving you advance notice as opposed to, I'm giving you pre-information rather than post-information, that Elisheva's son is who one day will be himself the high priest, Elazar, will take one of the daughters of Putiel, who is an Egyptian, right? The daughters of Putiel, and his Elisheva's grandson, the famous Pinchas, will be the progeny of both an Israelite and somebody from the priesthood and an Egyptian. So in other words, the new high priest is going to be, his mother will not be Jewish, right? Will not be Israelite. And this Pinchas is, of course, very zealous for God, and ends up also murdering the 2 people for, in Numbers 25, for committing blasphemy in front of the people. And he's also given Brit Shalom, the covenant of peace. So in other words, so she's wondering, who are all these people, all right? Who is Putiel, who is Putiel's daughters, right? And she wonders all these things, all right? So, and then, okay, so she we can skip this, all right. So we can skip this as well. So now we're ready, before we go to the Midrash, let me just stop sharing. And do any of you have any comments to make before we actually go to read the Midrash?
I
Then if
do.
I have,
I
and then
do.
if I have, 1 second, and then if I have time, I'll come back to something else afterwards. Yes.
Well, this is fascinating, but it sounds like we are putting our values of 2025 on views of Elisheva. I mean, that's the way women were regarded then. As
So what, Margie?
in
So
respect
what?
to the other people in their family who happen to be men.
But so what? That's what modern Midrash is, right?
Yeah, that's true.
That's what makes it living, right?
That's true.
I hope that,
Also,
yeah, 1 second.
so in those days,
Wait a
though,
minute. I hope that all of you, if you don't have it, that you may possibly buy it, but I hope you've all seen the women's commentary for the Torah. That's exactly what keeps the Torah living, that we all continue to have commentary on it. If we wouldn't have commentary on it, it would be a dead book. Yes, sorry, Stevie. I'm sorry,
yeah,
sorry, Margie, so harsh.
Okay, okay.
But in those days, it was a patriarchal society, so they didn't look at the mother being the bloodline.
I know that's what Margie is saying. You're right, but that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. We have a right to be critical and say, and that's the whole idea of modern Midrash. And by the way, if you go to listen to a rabbi's sermon today, what connection does what's going on, with the fires in California have to do with anything else, right? Or we just unfortunately had a fire in Israel, all right? And believe you me, some people jokingly said, I mean, it wasn't a joke, jokingly said, well, maybe we had those fires because of all the sinning going on in Israel right now. Doesn't that sound horrible to say something like that? Right? But I'm sure some of you may have heard that or thought that, and that sounds like something positively medieval to make a connection like that, right? Yeah. Or during the days of AIDS, all the people who said that was a disease caused by, that it was a homosexual disease, right? Even though there were a lot of innocent people who, innocent, I mean, I don't mean innocent, people who were not homosexuals who had transfusions and had nothing to do with homosexuality, but it was considered, and it didn't get it didn't get attention, and B, people looked upon it as sinning, right? During that time. Most of us are old enough to remember all of that, right? In our recent past. I don't know about Jill, you're a nurse, I don't know, but you're old enough to remember that. The rest of us, okay, so let me share the screen with I'm going to give you numbers right now. So Barbara, you'll be reader number 1, Toby, reader number 2, Louise, reader number 3, Margie, reader number 4, Joyce, reader number 5, Jerry Lynn, reader number 6, and Francine, reader number 7. All of you remember those numbers? I need 7 readers. You all remember your numbers?
Yeah.
Okay. Share. Okay, so I'll just start right here because this is the how she begins. This is Jill Hammond's Midrash, the 10th plague, and she starts out with the quotation of Aaron taking to his wife Elisheva, all of who she is, and the fact that Aaron's son took to wife one of Putiel's daughter, all right, and then the Midrash about the Shifra and Puah were Yocheved and Miriam, and they finally the 5 joys that Elisheva had. So that's her opening page. Okay, so here I have it numbered here, so I don't even have to interrupt you when the numbers show up. You just continue. Okay.
Even during the hail, Yocheved had gone to deliver babies. Life does not stop even for acts of God. Egyptian women have special need for midwives who would not be waylaid by hailstones or hungry locusts. The plagues, Yocheved said, were no excuse for failure to do one's job, but tonight Yocheved's biting voice was absent. She had run to the communal ovens to bake for the journey. Miriam had gone to dispense her wisdom in the huts of the slave chieftains. Neither would attend a birth tonight. Tonight, the angel of death had descended. Tonight, Elisheva was alone, a midwife sitting quietly by the hearth. Elisheva dried her hands on her apron. She hummed a small song to her youngest. Family was her comfort this time of wonders and dangers. Elisheva's father and mother had died years before of overwork and disease. Her younger brother had a friend, Aaron, whom she loved. So it had been her fate to marry Yocheved's son, older brother to the mysterious Moses. Aaron was kind. She had needed kindness. Her pain at losing her own family prompted her to learn from Yocheved and Miriam their family trade. With that trade had come skill, patience, and enough courage to disobey Pharaoh's decrees. But now that blood had filled the Nile, she was as frightened as everyone else. That morning, she had seen how the firstborn of Egypt were shunned in the streets and even in their homes. Moses said the plagues came from God, but Elisheva found herself questioning why a merciful God would allow such suffering.
There was a knock at the door. The girl was spotted with the remnants of boils and insect bites. Her dress was Egyptian. Her face was a wrinkled dot of fear. Elisheva drew away sharply from the child's outstretched hand. Please, the child said, it's my sister's time. Elisheva turned away toward the fire. The boys were asleep in the house's inner reaches. You'll have to wait, she said. The midwives have gone out. Having told the lie, she wished to comfort the child. Shall I bring you some herb tea, she said. The girl did not move. Please, she said, I've seen you at birthings before. My sister's bleeding. The baby's wedged inside her somehow. Please come. Elisheva had never been afraid of death before. Tonight, she thought of the plague feeling its way along Egypt's rough-edged alleyways. She could not bear the thought of leaving her 4 sons alone without their mother. Why haven't you gone to an Egyptian midwife? Elisheva asked. My sister's a firstborn, and so is the baby, the girl admitted. I've been all over. Everyone else is afraid. Elisheva was silent for a moment. Anger welled up within her that because of an Egyptian child, she should be in fear of her life the night before freedom. I won't come, she said harshly. She turned away and roughly poked the embers with a stick.
The girl was silent then. She slunk toward the slow door, brushing against the dead reeds poking from the shabby wall. Elisheva made a small noise, watching her go. The girl turned back suddenly, her face like ash with a single cinder left. My sister is in pain, she said with a clenched face. She can't even speak. She can barely sit up. She has no strength left. She could die, and you're going to sit here by your warm fire and stir your ashes because she's an Egyptian and because you're scared. What kind of midwife are you? Aren't you supposed to care about all babies? The girl's voice was like Yocheved's, toothed and copper-plated. The bruised face of the Egyptian girl seemed to mirror every desperate pregnant woman Elisheva had ever attended. The risk seemed great, the rewards small. I will come, Elisheva conceded and reached for her warm robe. The alleys of the Hebrews soon led to Egyptian streets. There was no sound except the weeping of the bereaved, which was quickly silenced by fearful households. There were no cattle or insects to fill the streets with noise. The firstborns, who were still alive, huddled in the byres and ruins where others had driven them. Elisheva became grateful that because of the clouds over the city, the night was completely dark. There were no moving shadows to remind her of the angel who walked over Egypt. Her gratitude ceased when her foot landed on a corpse. Then she merely walked forward and thought of nothing.
When they arrived at the house, hunch-walled and topped with reed bundles, it smelled of blood. Elisheva felt herself begin to retch from fear. She swallowed and straightened her back. Then she stooped to enter the low opening into the house. The girl scurried ahead of her, breathing hard. The scene before her, disarranged bedclothes and pots of hot water steaming, was like any other lying in. Yet a pall hung over the room. There were no anxious voices. An Egyptian god lay useless on a table. The husband had long since run from the house. The woman in the bed looked up at her with bloodshot eyes. Elisheva was afraid to touch her, for fear she might be slain herself. Like the woman in labor, Elisheva was a firstborn. Yet the white clothes lent some sense of normalcy, and she could not believe the angel of death lurked outside. The smoky brown walls of the hut seemed sturdy and safe. Hours began to pass, punctuated by cries from
Elisheva
other...
went briskly to work.
Oh, I'm sorry. Of the hut seemed sturdy and safe, Elisheva went briskly to work. I'm sorry. Hours began to pass, punctuated by cries from other houses. The mother had lost much blood, but had enough energy to squeeze out a small body with Elisheva's help. The wet man-child was born backward. An omen of the times, Elisheva thought. She pulled him from the depths of his mother in one clean, practiced motion. His wisp of hair was the color of grated ginger, his skin a shade of horseradish. He was beautiful.
Whoops. One second.
Okay. Who's number 5?
Joyce.
Joyce, you're muted.
Joyce, you're muted, Joyce.
Okay, I unmuted. The midwife, do you hear now?
Yeah.
Yes. The midwife wrapped up the child and spoke words of comfort to the mother. The mother nursed and smiled at her son. Elisheva thanked God for the instant bond between mother and child. She had seen it all so often, but it was always a miracle. The new mother's young sister, eyes fastened on her nephew, finally fell asleep on a reed mat. Elisheva packed her things and got ready to leave. She put on her robe and belted it, but she lingered and kept lingering. She wanted to get home to her own children, but somehow she couldn't seem to set her foot on the doorsill. 4 hours passed, then 5. A lightning of the sky came, and then it was almost dawn. Elisheva began to hope that although there was no blood on the lintel, death had passed over this house. When the gray shadow entered the room, Elisheva saw it first. She felt her old anger return toward Egyptians, toward this mother and her child. She turned her back to the shadow and held her breath. She thought of Aaron, of his kind mouth pressed against hers. A minute later, Elisheva could feel the mother's pulse sleeping away. The child's lips were turning blue.
Wait, 1 second, sorry. Whoops,
What? Wait a minute.
1 minute.
Here we are.
Yeah, she herself felt healthy. She breathed a sigh of relief that the plague had not touched her. She began to think of returning home. Home made her
No,
think.
who's the 6th reader?
Oh,
I
yeah.
am. Home made her think of all that this home was about to lose. Elisheva whipped around and faced the angel. Her anger suddenly focused on the unfair decree that took away innocent life. "Why are you here?" she screamed into the mist. "Being firstborn isn't a crime. What have this mother and child done worthy of death? They don't deserve to perish for being born." Then Elisheva became aware of something within the grayness, something small and shining and still, like a beacon in a storm. From the shining came a voice. "Why are you here, Elisheva?" it asked. "I belong here," she said, weeping. She hugged the mother and child to her with a strength she had known in herself only when she was near her own family. The soft voice was audible only to her. Mother and infant had slipped into unconsciousness. The Egyptian girl stood open-mouthed near her bed, staring at the smoky light. "Your vigil this night has not been in vain," the voice told her. "This mother and child will live because of you, and there will be an end to the plague on the firstborn. No one else will die on this night. Because you were not afraid to follow a stranger into her suffering, I will bless you and build you a great posterity. I will give to your hands the power of saving life. I will give to your house the priesthood. Your children will offer sacrifices for the nation. They shall be holy to me. And because you love this family as your own, your grandchildren will descend from it. With them I will make my covenant of peace."
Through days of wonder, Elisheva imagined her sons growing into men. The light faded suddenly, like the end of a dream. On the doorpost was a smear of blood like the ones on Israeli doorposts. She felt the new mother pull at her hand. We're still alive, the woman spoke with great awe. Yes, and you have a beautiful, healthy baby, Elisheva told her. She began packing up her herbs and cloths. The family was no doubt waiting for her. Wait, the mother said and held her gaze. I want you to take us with you. I know you are going to a place where the stranger will be protected. Please give us the chance to live in such a place. Elisheva was startled. She wanted to refuse. Surely the Israelites would not accept these Egyptians as comrades. Then she considered the vision she had seen. We need to leave right away, she said. I understand, the mother answered. We have nothing to pack. What is your name? Elisheva asked her. Putiel, the woman said. She squeezed the hand of her young sister, who for the first time shyly smiled. A generation later in the Sinai wilderness, on a golden dawn, Putiel's second daughter gave birth to Elisheva's grandson. Elisheva and her apprentices, Putiel's sister and daughters, delivered the child. They gave him the name Pinchas, meaning dark one. His name was in memory of the night of the 10th plague, and in honor of the night sky above Sinai, which Putiel had lived to see.
Okay, thank you to all the readers. What strikes you about this particular? It's an amazing story, and we don't have to discuss the backstory because we have all the information before. So we just were able to read it as a story. What struck you about this story? Francine, yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that there was a great deal of talk about accepting the stranger. And I think that's a major theme in the book of Exodus, and a very important theme for Jews and especially today.
Okay, so I mean, this I'm glad you noticed that, because today where we're having so much trouble with that, and there's so much demonization of the other, that the message here, Louise.
The other thing that struck me, that Elisheva acted in spite of her fear, and that the overall goodness of her calling as a midwife overruled the fear, and she went.
Okay, her fear and prejudice.
And prejudice, yes,
and prejudice.
absolutely.
Yeah, Geraldine?
Okay, so I couldn't help but think that she was a volunteer in the volunteer fire department. Okay, where you don't really have to go. You're there. You're doing a service, but through the hail and everything else, and she decided, okay, let me get in the ambulance, put on my robe, put the lights on the belt, and let's go and take care of what we need to take care of. That's also a homage to the nurses in the room too. But anyway, it's where she had some hesitation. She still went and did her job. And then when it was time and the mother wanted to go back with her, it's like you've gotten her to the hospital and she's ready to go back home when you're just finished cleaning up and ready to go too. Okay, so.
Okay. Very nice. By the way, I was actually thinking today in terms of the soldiers in Israel who are the Miluim, the reserves, not the ones who are in the army to begin with, the normal service, but the ones who are in reserves, who are being called up beyond, And by the way, some of them, I don't know if you're reading the newspaper, some of them don't want to go back. And, most of them still are agreeing, but quite a few are not, enough to be worrying about sharing. So, I mean, the whole idea of volunteerism and pride in your profession, right? Even if it's dangerous. I mean, think, COVID, when you had to go out to do your job because otherwise society would fall apart. That's one thing. The other thing I thought, which was very interesting, I underlined it as you were reading. Let me just go back to sharing. I underlined this as you were reading. It's very interesting. Of course, she has a little bit, of the mysterious in here, right? The mysterious vision that she has here. Which, do you think that adds to things or takes away? By the way, the soft voice and everything.
I think her arguing with the angel of death was very brave of her. And I think it was integral to the whole story.
Okay.
Because without that, it's not as powerful.
Okay, so it makes the story much more powerful, all right? And also, it helps explain this whole idea of the angel and notice that at the end there is some red, there is some blood on the lintel here. So who put that blood there? In other words, how did that blood get there? If you think about it, right? So that also is mysterious that there's blood on that particular lintel because they. They're going to be part of the people of Israel in the future, this family. But I thought this was really, what does this whole blessing sound like, right? Because you are not afraid to follow a stranger, I will bless you and give you, and saving, I will give you houses, your children will offer sacrifices, they'll be holy to me. What does that remind you of?
Abraham.
Reminds me of God speaking to Abraham.
Yeah. It's a blessing, it's a blessing given to somebody, because you, Abraham, were not afraid to follow me, God, right, into a strange land. I will give you all these things in the future, right? Very interesting. So this also, Elisheva, not only is she not an anonymous person anymore, but she's a person who is responsible for the continuity, right, of the priesthood, etc. So I thought this was, very interesting to me. Anything else that you noticed that you want to comment on?
Yeah, it's
so.
Yeah, the fact that she didn't run right away as soon as the baby was born, and something was keeping her there, and it's kind of. And the writer is in her head at that point and saying, why am I not running away and making sure that I can get home safely? And I thought that was an important part of it. Something
right. And you had the opposite at the beginning, right? The opposite, right, that you want to leave, yeah, right? And the voice of conscience there was the Egyptian bedraggled looking person. Yeah. I just saw another hand. Stevie, yeah. And then Margie.
So first of all, most of the Midrashes say that it was only the firstborn son, and this has the firstborn daughters, the females are also included in this, which is equality if you but the point that this story really hit home for me. I don't know why, but I just read it recently in the last couple of months. And I don't know why, because I read the whole book when you first talked about it. So, but this story in particular, in the end, when she's talking, when her granddaughter has or her granddaughter has the child at the very end.
Right.
That happened because she took action. It wasn't just the men surrounding her. It was everybody lived after that. And this young girl and her sister and her baby lived because of her actions. And so she wasn't helpless, and she wasn't just the wife of, the mother of.
Absolutely. So you could almost say that Jill has written a counter midrash to the original midrash, right? And it's all women except for Pinchas at the end, but it's all through the lineage of women, right? And by the way, when you read stories of the Holocaust, about how women kept each other alive, there's a book that just came out a couple of years ago about all these women who and how central women were, to keeping each other alive in different ways than men. That also is interesting. Margie, I think you had a hand.
Yes, I did. I just was going to embellish the point that the previous speaker made. I don't remember who it was, that it contrasting the Elisheva who took action as the midwife to the Elisheva who stood silent afterwards. So it's not like she was incapable of reaction, because she did have a reaction at some point. Now, why was she quiet? It's a toss up. Maybe losing a child made her quiet. Maybe marriage made her submissive. You don't know. You don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, at
But
this point in her life, by the way, this is prior to her losing her sons, because this is still, in the early days. I mean,
that's true.
they're
That's
just leaving
true.
Egypt. But no, but it's a good question. Francine, yeah.
Unlike many of the other midrashim we have read, this one had a happy ending, and I think it's certainly uplifting for me.
Okay, that's good. We're already at 7 o'clock already. But what I wanted to just show you is that there are many other midrashim about Elisheva. And 1 minute, I'll just see if I could quickly find it. I have it when I taught my group in Rehovot. Is this Rehovot? Yeah. And I shared with them then, yeah, 1 second. I shared with them then all the different people, including myself, who had written midrashim about. I'll just share the screen with you. Share screen. Yeah. Okay. So there are other feminist midrashim on Elisheva, right? And so you have Ellen Frankel, who in the 5 books of Miriam has Elisheva speaking in her own voice. Of course, Jill Hammer. Then there's someone, Susan Phillips, who talks about the silent wife speaks, right? My own midrash, Elisheva, when is it a time for me? And you also have Penina Edelman in her, so there are, at least that I know of, 1, 2, 3, 4, there are of at least 5 different midrashim. And so this is what Ellen's book looks like. And this is what Jill's book looks like, that we just looked at now. No, not Jill, sorry, Penina Edelman's book. I've taken a lot of things from there. Here's Jill's book. And here's All the Women Followed Her, which is a collection of people related to Miriam. And here's my.
Hi, darling. I'll be done in a minute. How are you? I'm good. I'm just gonna go on a run. Okay, if you want to stop on your way back.
Yeah,
Maybe I may be going to the beach, so I'll maybe.
Okay, love you, sweetie.
Look at you, Sandra.
have midrashim, different midrashim. Okay, so anyway, we just heard your. By the way, in general, Joyce. Okay, I was just about to
No.
mute you.
No, I just wanted to say one thing. It's fascinating how this woman is Putiel and is very important in the birthing of the high priest. And that's fascinating.
Right.
Wow.
In other words, think today where if the mother decides who's Jewish, right? Hello.
Yeah.
Not only does this mother, who's not Jewish, right, have a child who's considered, but the high priest is descended from this particular, right?
Someone called.
So this,
Thanks, sweetie.
this is, all right, now I am muting you. Okay, I just muted Joyce because, okay, anyone else, any other comments? So I think this was, really, yeah, Norman.
Yeah, I just thought it was very interesting to contrast the different interpretations of who Putiel was, because I saw one of the things that said maybe it was Jethro. And to contrast Jethro with this young lady giving birth, this young Egyptian lady giving is quite a contrast. And this somehow seemed more, I don't know.
Right. So
Nicer.
If anyone wants to write a new Midrash and make Putiel be Jethro here, that's a good suggestion for one of you to write a Midrash. And then notice, he's a high priest for both sides, right? Because Jethro was the Midianite high priest. So that's even more interesting. And what made the rabbis think of that, right? That's thank you for that comment. I know I slept over that very quickly at the end. Okay, so that's a great point. Okay, so if there are no more comments, hopefully we'll go back to normal and I'll be seeing you on a regular basis. And let's
Thank
hope
you, Naomi.
for better things in our world on both
Thank you,
sides.
Naomi.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes.
This may play absolutely no role because it's usually for kids, but next week is Erev Lag BaOmer. Does that mean anything to anybody?
Not to me, because I will simply close my door so the smells of fire does not make it in. And I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of restrictions
Yes.
in Israel on fires next week.
Oh,
so
yes.
it's going to be,
Right.
I don't think it's going to be a real problem next week.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, that Thursday, this year, Thursdays are very bad for study.
Yeah.
Except Shavuot comes out on a Sunday, so
Right.
that's okay.
Right.
Okay, so see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello.
Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you. Thank
Good
you.
week,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
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 Stop
Bye-bye.
recording.